President Biden held a bilateral meeting with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy today as the NATO summit in Washington comes to a close. President Biden told his Ukrainian counterpart the U.S. will be with Ukraine, quote, every step of the way in its war against Russia. He also announced even more military aid for the nation only 2 days after pledging additional air defense equipment to Ukraine.
Today, I'm proud to announce new security assistance package for Ukraine. This will be the 8th package I've authorized since we've signed the National Security Bill.
White House National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby is at the Washington Convention Center where the NATO summit is happening. Admiral, it's great to see you.
Thanks. Good to be with you, Ouija.
Today, President Biden reiterated a message that he has long said to President Zelenskyy of Ukraine, that we will stay with you, period. But we also know that Zelenskyy said today that in order to defeat Russia, in order to win, the U.S. must lift limits on using its weapons to strike military targets in Russia. Is the U.S. prepared to do that?
We've been in active conversations with the Ukrainians since the beginning of the war about their needs, the capabilities that they require, the guidance that governs the use of some of those weapons. As you know, Ouija, the president just recently allowed them to use U.S. weapons in cross-border strikes to get at imminent Russian threats. There's been no change other than that. We understand the Ukrainian desires, of course, and President Zelenskyy has a right to want to do whatever he can to defeat the Russian threat. And so we'll continue to have those conversations, but I have no change to our policies to speak to today. I would add that in addition to supporting Ukraine, President Biden has been very, very focused on two other things. One, making sure that we're meeting our NATO commitments, and he's added an additional 20,000 troops to the continent of Europe as an example of that. But number two, to make sure that this conflict doesn't escalate, doesn't start World War III, doesn't become what Putin claims already that it is, that it's a U.S. versus Russia or West versus Russia or an attack by NATO. So we also have to worry about escalation issues here with respect to what Mr. Putin might or might not do. And that has been on our minds since, again, the beginning of the conflict.
And I hear you, John, but of course, NATO leaders would all agree that it is everyone's best interest if this war came to an end. So can you talk about the flip side, what the concerns are for the U.S. if it were to lift all of these restrictions?
Well, as I said, I mean, we're going to continue to have these conversations with the Ukrainians, and I won't get ahead of those conversations, but concerns about escalation are valid because I think we can all agree that an escalation of this conflict beyond just Ukraine is not only not good for Ukraine and the Ukrainian people, but it's not good for anybody living on the European continent, and it's certainly not good for the American people. And the president has to weigh those decisions every time he's approving a new weapons package, every time he is providing guidance to Ukrainian leaders about how those weapons should be used. And they are using the weapons provided by the United States to very good effect. They have pushed back the Russians from Kharkiv. The Russians have failed to take Zaporizhia and other towns in the northeast of the country. And so now that we have the funding to support them, and the president announced a new package today, Ukrainians are, in fact, making this not a stalemate, but a very dynamic battlefront all along that line.
And of course, John, this would be a very different situation if Ukraine was a member of NATO. And leaders agreed this week that the country is on a, quote, irreversible track to becoming part of the alliance. We don't, however, have any details about when that might happen. So can you tell us anything about a timeline?
It's difficult to get into a specific timeline when they are at war right now. And obviously, membership in NATO at this time, while there's a war going on, means that NATO is, in fact, at war with Russia. So we got to make sure that they win this war first and foremost, and the president's doing everything he can to do that. Secondly, we got to make sure that whenever and however this war ends, and nobody can predict that, Ouija, we'd have to recognize that they're still going to have a long border with Russia and a still aggressive Russia. And we got to make sure that they have the defense capabilities they need to protect themselves when this war is over. And that's why the president just a couple of weeks ago signed a bilateral security agreement with President Zelenskyy. And then thirdly, to the question about NATO, to make sure that they are on a credible path to NATO membership. And that means doing all the things that any nation that wants to be part of the NATO alliance has to do, including governance issues and shoring up institutions and making sure that political reforms are on track. It's understandable that Ukraine hasn't had a whole heck of a lot of time to focus on those kinds of reforms right now while they're at war trying to defend themselves. But we are still going to work with them on those reforms and getting them on that path to NATO membership. It will happen. Clearly, the allies have said so. It's irreversible. They will become NATO allies. But we'll all have to be mindful of the path forward and the bridge to NATO membership.
And John, we expect to hear from President Biden directly about all of this as he hosts a press conference to wrap up the summit. Can you talk about how he's been preparing for this press conference? When is the last time you saw him, and whether he feels the pressure that is on him tonight?
I saw him just this morning. I saw him all day yesterday as he has been not only preparing for all the events here at the NATO summit, including his press conference, but also keeping tabs on the national security situation around the world. He's been constantly updated on all kinds of issues. He's looking forward to this opportunity to close out the NATO summit with a strong summation of it and with the opportunity to take questions from reporters. It's not something he shies away from. He's looking forward to it, and I guarantee you he'll be ready.
John, is there anything you can share about how he has been preparing for tonight to take questions from reporters? Obviously, after the debate, the stakes are incredibly high.
Yeah, I know he prepares for press conferences the way he prepares for any major event, including all the meetings he's been having here at the NATO summit. He reads the material, the relevant material. He asks good questions of the staff, the national security team. He's been preparing in the same way that I've seen him prepare in the past for press conferences or for other major events. He'll be ready. He's looking forward to it. He knows it's a great opportunity to put this NATO summit into some context here at the very end of it.
And we are looking forward to it too. John Kirby, thank you so much.